The Interstellar Defense Academy on Lysara Prime gleamed like a polished obsidian spire against the planet's copper sky. Thousands of cadets from a dozen worlds converged here to train in the art of warfare under the banner of the Galactic Concordat. The Academy prided itself on producing officers who could defeat any enemy with surgical precision, minimal losses, and unwavering resolve. Cadet Virus Arcos stood at the edge of the training plateau, her iridescent wings tightly folded against her back as she observed the morning drills. The breeze carried the metallic scent of the sky armor worn by her fellow Zephyrian cadets as they practiced aerial maneuvers in tight formation. She watched them with a critical eye, noticing the slightest deviations in their patterns. "Your clan would be proud," came a voice from behind her. Virus turned to see instructor Mir Zell, the Oran philosopher who taught ethics of interstellar conflict. Unlike most Orans with their crystalline exoskeletons, Mir Zell's outer layer had been polished smooth from centuries of existence, giving them an almost liquid appearance when they moved. "They expect nothing less than excellence," Virus replied, her tone neutral, despite the pride swelling in her chest. The Arcos Sky Warriors had never lost an aerial campaign in 7 generations. Her mother commanded the Northern Wind Squadron. Her father designed tactical flight patterns used throughout Zephyrian space, and her 3 elder siblings had all graduated from the Academy with honors. The weight of expectation sat heavily on her shoulders, but it was a weight she had trained her entire life to bear. "Excellence comes in many forms," Mir Zell said cryptically, their voice resonating like struck crystal. "Your tactical scores are among the highest I've seen, but combat is more than equations and maneuvers." Virus nodded respectfully, but felt a flicker of irritation. The Orans were known for their philosophical meanderings, always speaking in riddles when straightforward instruction would suffice. Still, she valued Mir Zell's perspective, even when it challenged her. "Today's formation drill will focus on atmospheric entry and dispersal," Virus said, changing the subject. "Commander Korin has programmed the simulation to include variable wind shear and enemy countermeasures. And you'll excel, as always," Mir Zell said. "But don't forget to join us for the special seminar this afternoon. I believe you received the notification?" Virus nodded. Her neural implant had flagged a mandatory session, though the details were mysteriously absent. "What's it about?" "Something unprecedented," Mir Zell replied, their crystalline form catching the morning light. "Earth has contributed to our archives." With that, the instructor glided away, leaving Virus to wonder what the humans, one of the younger species in the Concordat, could possibly contribute to the Academy's ancient and comprehensive military database. Hours later, after completing the morning drills with predictable excellence, Virus made her way to the central amphitheater. The massive chamber, designed to accommodate beings of all physiologies, was filled to only a quarter of its capacity. She recognized cadets from across the galactic arm, humanoid hydrons with their gill slits and webbed hands, insectoid vespians with compound eyes, and chitinous exoskeletons, spectral luminians who appeared as little more than luminous outlines, and even a cluster of serpentine Nagarai coiled in their specialized seating pods. Commander Thales Korin, head of tactical doctrine, stood at the center of the room. His tall, rigid posture and impeccably pressed uniform marked him as former Terran military, though he had served the Academy for longer than many cadets' lifespans. His face was a map of old scars and stern discipline. "Cadets!" His voice boomed without technological amplification. "You represent the elite 5% of your class. Your superior performance has earned you the privilege and the burden of being the first to analyze new material of significant tactical importance." Virus straightened in her seat, her wings rustling slightly with anticipation. The Academy's database contained millions of battle simulations, strategic analyses, and historical accounts from across the known galaxy. New material was rare, especially something deemed important enough for this level of ceremony. Earth has submitted unfiltered combat footage to the Concordat archives. Commander Corrin continued. Not simulations or tactical overlays, but raw sensory recordings from their 21st century conflicts. The human delegation has requested that these materials be studied by future commanders of all species to provide perspective. A murmur rippled through the gathered cadets. Virus exchanged glances with Rhea Tolan, a Hydran engineering specialist seated beside her. Rhea's bioluminescent patterns flickered in what Virus had learned to recognize as surprise. "This is unprecedented," Rhea whispered, her gill slits pulsing with excitement. "The humans have always been reluctant to share their warfare techniques." Virus nodded. Though Earth had been admitted to the Concordat nearly a century ago, humans maintained an air of isolation in military matters. They participated in joint exercises and contributed to defense initiatives. But something about their approach to warfare remained shrouded in mystery. Some whispered it was shame. Others suggested strategic secrecy. "These recordings have been adapted for cross-species neural interface," Commander Corrin explained. "You will experience them through a modified sensory filter that translates human perceptual data to your own neurological systems." Virus felt a flutter of unease. Direct sensory recordings were rare in tactical training. Most species preferred to maintain emotional distance in their combat analyses. "You will spend the next 5 cycles reviewing this material in the archives. Your findings will determine whether it becomes part of the standard curriculum." Commander Corrin's gaze swept over the gathered cadets. "Dismissed to the archive chamber. Archivist Stahl will oversee your initial viewing session." As the cadets filed out, Virus found herself walking alongside Rhea toward the archive wing. The Hydran's smooth skin glistened with a thin layer of protective mucus, essential for her comfort in the Academy's dry air. "What do you think we'll see?" Rhea asked, her large, pupilless eyes blinking with rapid nictitating membranes. "Human combat must be rudimentary compared to Zephyrian aerial techniques." "Perhaps," Virus replied, though she wasn't so certain. Humans lacked the natural advantages of many Concordat species. No wings, limited strength compared to some, no inherent psychic abilities like others. Yet, they had survived and thrived, eventually reaching the stars despite these limitations. Such resilience suggested there was more to their warfare than met the eye. The archive chamber was a vast, circular room lined with neural interface pods. At the center stood a human woman with silver-streaked black hair, pulled into a severe bun. Her uniform lacked military insignia, instead bearing the spiral insignia of the Concordat archivists. "Welcome, cadets. I am Archivist Juno Stahl," she said, her voice carrying a gravity that belied her small stature. "I must warn you that what you are about to experience differs from your previous tactical analyses. These recordings capture combat as it was experienced by participants, without strategic overlay, without tactical commentary, without the clarity of retrospect." Virus settled into an interface pod designed to accommodate her wings. The contoured seat embraced her form as neural connectors extended to meet the implant at the base of her skull. Around her, the other cadets were similarly connecting to the system. The footage has been compiled from various Earth conflicts spanning the early 21st century. Archivist Stahl continued. "It represents what humans call asymmetric warfare, conflicts without clear front lines, without uniformed opponents, often in civilian-populated areas." The archivist's expression grew solemn. "I will be monitoring your neural responses. If at any point the experience becomes too intense, you may disengage by focusing on the exit protocol in your neural display." With that final warning, the lights dimmed, and Virus felt the familiar tingle of the neural interface activating. Her consciousness expanded as the system calibrated to her Zephyrian nervous system. Then the world changed. Heat, oppressive, smothering heat unlike anything on her cool homeworld. Virus felt sweat, a human response her body was interpreting through her own cooling mechanisms, trickling down her face beneath a heavy helmet. The weight of body armor pressed against her chest, restricting the movement she would normally have in flight. Her vision narrowed to a limited human perspective, without the panoramic range her species enjoyed naturally. She was in a vehicle, jolting violently over uneven terrain. Around her sat human soldiers, their faces masks of tension beneath layers of dust. No one spoke. The only sounds were the rumble of the engine and occasional static bursts from a communication device. Then came the explosion. The vehicle lurched sideways. Screams, blood, confusion. Virus felt her heart hammering. Not her heart, but the heart of the human whose experience she was sharing. The air filled with dust and the acrid smell of burning metal. Someone was shouting orders, but the words blurred beneath the ringing in her ears. Outside, a city street materialized through the haze. Buildings of primitive concrete and steel. Many partially collapsed. Small figures ran for cover, civilians caught in the crossfire. A child clutched a bleeding arm. An old woman lay motionless in a doorway. Gunfire erupted from somewhere ahead. The soldiers around her returned fire, their weapons deafening in the enclosed space. Through the human's eyes, Virus watched tracers streak toward shadowy figures in windows and behind barricades. A young soldier beside her jerked backward, a spray of red erupting from his throat. His eyes, so similar to her own despite the species difference, went wide with shock, then vacant. The scene shifted. Now she was in a makeshift medical facility. Rows of wounded lay on stretchers. Medics rushed between them, their uniforms stained dark. A doctor, hands trembling with exhaustion, struggled to close a gaping wound in a screaming patient's abdomen. Outside, explosions continued to rock the building, dust raining from the ceiling with each impact. Another shift. Nighttime. Through night vision equipment, the world appeared in eerie green monochrome. The human she was experiencing crept forward with a small team, approaching a compound of simple buildings. Through windows, thermal signatures revealed sleeping forms, some small, children. The command came through headset communications. Confirmed hostile location, green light. What followed was methodical, silent violence. The team breached doors, moved through rooms with practiced precision. Sleepers woke to find weapons aimed at their faces. Some surrendered, some resisted, some died. The children screamed. The scenes continued to change, jumping between locations, between perspectives. A sniper watching a roadway for days, relieving himself in bottles rather than abandoning his position. A pilot releasing munitions on coordinates below, never seeing the actual impact. A village elder negotiating with soldiers while his people watched with fear and resentment. Throughout it all, Virus felt what these humans felt. Fear that turned bowels to water, rage that narrowed vision to tunnels, grief that hollowed the chest, numbness that came after seeing too much death, camaraderie so intense it transcended romantic love, hatred so pure it consumed rational thought. When the neural interface finally disengaged, Virus found herself gasping for air, her wings trembling uncontrollably. Around the chamber, other cadets were emerging from their pods with similar signs of distress. A Vespian cadet was clicking his mandibles in agitation. One of the Luminians had dimmed to almost nothing, a sign of extreme emotional withdrawal in their species. Only Rhea seemed relatively composed, though her gill slits were pulsing rapidly. "Fascinating from an engineering perspective," she said quietly. Their technology was so primitive, yet they achieved remarkable tactical outcomes with such limited resources. Virus couldn't formulate a response. Her mind was still processing the flood of sensations and emotions, so alien, yet somehow deeply familiar. This wasn't the clean, strategic warfare she had trained for. There was no glory in what she had witnessed, no honor as her people defined it. Your neural responses have been recorded, Archivist Stahl announced, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. You will reconvene tomorrow to discuss your analyses. I recommend you use your personal meditation techniques to process this experience. As the cadets filed out, Virus found her legs unsteady. Commander Corrin stood by the exit, observing them with clinical interest. Cadet Arcos, he called as she passed. Your neural response patterns showed particularly strong empathic engagement. Interesting for a Zephyrian. Virus bristled at the implied criticism. Zephyrians were known for their tactical precision and emotional control, not empathy. I was unprepared for the sensory intensity. Commander. As intended, he replied with a thin smile. War is not experienced in tactical displays and strategic overlays. It is felt in the body and the mind. The humans understand this better than most. With respect, Commander, what I experienced wasn't warfare as we define it, Virus said, struggling to articulate her confusion. There was no clear objective, no defined enemy, no path to decisive victory. And therein lies the lesson. Cadet, Commander Corrin said. Not all conflicts can be won through superior force or brilliant strategy. Sometimes there is no victory, only survival and difficult choices. He paused, studying her face. Tomorrow's discussion should be illuminating, especially if you bring this discomfort into the open. Virus returned to her quarters, but sleep eluded her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the face of that child with the bleeding arm, heard the screams of civilians caught in crossfire. The textbook definitions of collateral damage and acceptable losses now seemed like hollow abstractions. The next morning, instead of joining the usual breakfast gathering, Virus found herself drawn back to the archive chamber. Archivist Stahl looked up in mild surprise as she entered. Cadet Arcos, the next viewing session isn't scheduled until later today. I need to see more, Virus said, her wings twitching with agitation. There has to be context I'm missing. These couldn't be standard combat operations. Archivist Stahl's expression softened slightly. What you saw were indeed standard operations for the conflicts of that era. But if you seek context, there is additional footage available. She led Virus to a private viewing pod and activated a different sequence. These are recordings from civilian perspectives during the same conflicts. The neural interface engaged, and Virus was immediately plunged into new horrors. A mother shielding her children as their home collapsed around them. A doctor working by flashlight after hospital power failed, deciding which patients would receive the last doses of medication. A farmer returning to fields rendered toxic by chemical weapons. A reporter documenting mass graves. When she emerged, Virus found her face wet with tears, a physiological response her species rarely exhibited. Why would humans contribute this to our training? She asked, her voice hoarse. It doesn't glorify their military prowess. It shows failure. Perhaps that is precisely the point, Archivist Stahl replied quietly. Humans joined the Concordat after nearly destroying their own planet. They learned lessons about warfare that many species discover too late. The archivist touched a control panel, bringing up historical images on a nearby display. Earth's wars evolved from formalized conflicts with clear rules to something much more chaotic and morally complex. When every civilian might be an enemy combatant, when victory conditions become politically rather than militarily defined, warfare transforms into something that can consume societies from within. Virus stared at the images. Ruined cities, refugee columns stretching to the horizon, environmental devastation that would take generations to heal. The Academy teaches us to win, she said slowly. But this shows that winning might be meaningless if the cost is too high. An astute observation, came Mir Zell's voice as the Oran philosopher glided into the chamber. One that many species discover only after catastrophic conflicts of their own. Virus turned to her instructor, wings flaring slightly in surprise. Is that why we're viewing this footage? As a warning? Partly, Mirzel admitted, but also because understanding the true nature of warfare, its chaos, its cost, its consequences, is essential for those who would lead others into battle. The crystalline being's form shifted, reflecting the archive's lights in patterns that conveyed deep thought. The Academy has perhaps been remiss in emphasizing the technical aspects of combat over its moral dimensions. Throughout the day, Virus returned to the archives repeatedly, moving between footage of different conflicts spanning Earth's violent century. She watched as tactics evolved, as weapons became more precise, yet somehow caused more suffering, as lines between combatants and civilians blurred until they nearly disappeared. By the time the scheduled analysis session began, she had viewed more footage than any of the other cadets. They gathered in a discussion chamber, seated around a circular table designed to promote equal exchange, regardless of species. Commander Korin presided, with Archivist Stahl and Instructor Mirzel observing from the periphery. Cadets, you have now had time to process what you experienced. Commander Korin began. We will analyze these human conflicts from multiple perspectives: tactical efficacy, resource allocation, achievement of strategic objectives, and sustainability of operations. Who would like to begin? A Nagarai cadet, his serpentine body coiled in his seat, spoke first. The human forces demonstrated remarkable adaptability in adverse conditions, he hissed. Their ground forces pivoted between conventional warfare and counterinsurgency operations with minimal retraining. An accurate assessment. Commander Korin nodded. Cadet Tolan, your engineering perspective. Ria's bioluminescent patterns brightened with enthusiasm. Their technological limitations forced creative solutions. The improvised explosive devices used against them were subsequently adapted for their own operations. Adaptation of civilian infrastructure for military purposes was particularly ingenious. Virus listened as each cadet highlighted different aspects of the human warfare they had witnessed. The Vespian noted the impressive coordination between small units, operating with minimal oversight. The Luminians praised the psychological operations designed to win civilian support. None of them mentioned the screaming children, the overwhelmed hospitals, the hollow-eyed survivors. Cadet Arkas, Commander Korin finally said, you've been uncharacteristically silent. Your tactical scores suggest you should have much to contribute about the aerial operations we witnessed. All eyes turned to Virus. She felt her wings trembling slightly and forced them still. The bombing operations were conducted with technical proficiency, she began slowly, but I question their strategic value in achieving sustainable peace. A subtle ripple of surprise moved through the room. Questioning the strategic value of any tactic was common in these sessions. But her emphasis on sustainable peace marked a deviation from standard Academy discourse, which typically focused on victory conditions. Elaborate, Commander Korin said, his expression unreadable. The footage showed multiple instances where kinetic operations achieved short-term tactical objectives, but created long-term strategic problems. Virus continued, her confidence growing. Civilian casualties generated recruitment opportunities for opposition forces. Infrastructure destruction removed economic opportunities that might have provided alternatives to militant engagement. Medical system collapse extended suffering beyond the conflict timeline. Are you suggesting military forces should prioritize civilian concerns over combat effectiveness? The Nagarai cadet asked, his forked tongue flicking with skepticism. I'm suggesting that the dichotomy is false, Virus replied. The footage demonstrates that ignoring civilian impacts directly reduced combat effectiveness by creating more enemies than were eliminated. Commander Korin leaned forward. An interesting perspective, Cadet. However, a military force's primary obligation is to achieve its assigned objectives with available resources. Broader societal concerns are the province of political leadership. With respect, Commander, Virus countered. The footage shows numerous instances where field commanders made tactical decisions with immediate political consequences. When a raid on a suspected enemy location resulted in civilian deaths, the political fallout created new military challenges. The separation between military action and political consequence appears artificial. The discussion grew heated as cadets divided in their interpretations. Some supported Virus's position that the human conflicts demonstrated the inseparability of military tactics from their wider impacts. Others maintained that cleaner delineation between military and civilian concerns would have produced better outcomes. Throughout, Commander Corrin guided the debate with pointed questions, never revealing his own position. As the session concluded, he assigned each cadet to prepare a detailed analysis of specific aspects of the human conflicts for presentation in the final Academy assembly before graduation. Cadet Arcas, he added, as they were dismissed. You will address the ethical dimensions of asymmetric warfare as demonstrated in the Earth conflicts. Your presentation will include recommendations for concordant policy regarding civilian engagement in future operations. Virus felt the weight of the assignment immediately. It was both an honor and a challenge. Ethical analysis typically fell to species with longer philosophical traditions than the Zephyrians, who were known primarily for tactical innovation rather than moral contemplation. Over the following weeks, Virus divided her time between required training exercises and deep dives into the human archives. She learned about Earth concepts like just war theory, proportionality, and distinction between combatants and non-combatants. She studied conflicts that spanned centuries before humans achieved space travel, noting patterns that repeated despite technological advancement. Most disturbing were the first-hand accounts from both soldiers and civilians. She spent hours absorbing personal narratives, trying to understand how beings so similar to many concordant species could inflict such suffering on one another, and how they lived with the consequences afterward. You've been spending more time in the archives than in flight drills, Rhea observed one evening as they shared a meal in the Academy's communal dining hall. The Hydran was methodically consuming protein cubes that dissolved in the water-filled section of her specialized dish. Commander Corrin noted your absence in yesterday's precision bombing exercise. I submitted my results from independent practice, Virus replied, picking at her own meal. Food had lost its appeal since she began reviewing the human archives. My scores exceeded requirements. That's not the point, Rhea said, her gill slits pulsing with concern. Academy training is about team coordination as much as individual performance. And frankly, you've been withdrawing from everyone, even me. Vera sighed, her wings drooping slightly. I'm sorry. These human conflicts, they've affected me more than I expected. Because of the emotional content, you can adjust your neural filters to dampen that input. That's not... Virus stopped herself. How could she explain that dampening the emotional impact would defeat the purpose? That she needed to feel the full weight of what she was witnessing to understand it. I think the humans included the emotional components deliberately, she said instead. They're trying to tell us something important about warfare that can't be conveyed through tactical analysis alone. Rhea's bioluminescent patterns shifted to a frequency that indicated skepticism. Or they're attempting to manipulate our training with their subjective experiences. Not all species process emotion the same way. What registers as trauma for humans might be interpreted differently by Zephyrians or Hydrans. True, Virus conceded. But pain, fear, grief, these seem to translate across species boundaries remarkably well, and the archives contain perspectives from all sides of their conflicts, not just their own forces. Rhea remained unconvinced, but she changed the subject to their upcoming graduation ceremonies. As she detailed the engineering corps posting she hoped to receive, Virus found her attention wandering. Once, Her greatest ambition had been to command her own aerial squadron, to add to her clan's unbroken record of victories. Now, that goal seemed hollow. The following day, Virus sought out instructor Mir Zell in the philosophy wing. The Orin was seated in a meditation chamber, their crystalline form refracting light in complex patterns that other Orins could read as deep philosophical treatises. "Instructor," Virus said, hesitating at the entrance. "May I speak with you?" Mir Zell's form shifted, the light pattern simplifying to basic communication mode. "Cadet Arcas, I've been expecting you." Virus entered and sat cross-legged on the floor, her wings folding tightly against her back. "I'm struggling with my assignment. The ethical dimensions of human warfare seem irreconcilable with concordant principles." "In what way?" Mir Zell asked, though their tone suggested they already knew the answer. "The Academy teaches us that precision, discipline, and tactical superiority lead to clean victories," Virus said. "But the human archives show that modern warfare is never clean, that victories are temporary at best, Pyrrhic at worst, that the distinction between warrior and civilian becomes meaningless in certain conflict types." "And this troubles you because I joined the Academy to become a warrior who brings honor to my clan," Virus said, frustration edging her voice. "But these human conflicts contain no honor as we define it. Just survival, compromise, and endless moral ambiguity." Mir Zell's crystalline form shifted again, light patterns becoming more complex. "Perhaps that is precisely why the humans contributed these archives. They learned through blood what other species might learn through observation." "But what am I supposed to recommend in my presentation?" Virus asked. "That the Concordat abandon military intervention entirely? That's not realistic. The choice isn't binary between unrestricted warfare and complete pacifism," Mir Zell replied. "The question is how a civilization wields its capacity for violence, and toward what ends." The Oran's form pulsed with a light pattern that Virus recognized as the equivalent of a contemplative sigh. Humans nearly destroyed themselves before they understood this. Some species in the Concordat's history did destroy themselves, failing to learn it. Others, like the Orins, learned only after devastating conflicts that left lasting scars on our worlds. "What about Zephyrians?" Virus asked. "Our histories celebrate our aerial campaigns as glorious and decisive." "Your histories are curated, as all histories are," Mir Zell said gently. "Ask yourself, where are the accounts from those defeated in those glorious campaigns? Where are the tallies of civilian casualties? Where are the ecological assessments of battlefields rendered uninhabitable?" Virus felt as though her wings had been clipped. Her entire identity as a sky warrior, her family's proud military lineage, all of it suddenly seemed built on selective memory and strategic omissions. "I don't know what to believe anymore," she admitted. "That," said Mir Zell, "is the beginning of wisdom." As the day of the final assembly approached, Virus worked feverishly on her presentation. She reviewed additional archives, consulted with archivist Stahl, and even requested rare historical records from her own homeworld, accounts that had been preserved but were seldom included in official histories. The morning of the assembly, she stood before her reflection, adjusting the formal sky armor that marked her as a soon-to-be officer of the Concordat forces. The polished plates gleamed, designed to catch the light during aerial maneuvers and inspire awe in those below. The ceremonial blade at her hip symbolized her clan's authority to take life in defense of Zephyrian interests. For the first time, the weight of the armor felt oppressive rather than empowering. The assembly hall was filled to capacity with cadets, instructors, and visiting dignitaries from across the Concordat. At the front, Commander Corin stood with Academy leadership and representatives from various military branches, waiting to receive the graduating officers into their ranks. Virus watched as her fellow cadets delivered their presentations. Rhea spoke confidently about engineering innovations derived from studying human urban combat techniques. The Vespian analyzed squad-level communication systems that could be adapted for hive mind species. The Nagarai detailed human counterinsurgency doctrine with cold precision. Then it was Virus's turn. She approached the podium, her wings held high in the traditional posture of a Zephyrian addressing honored equals. The neural projection system activated, ready to display the tactical analyses and policy recommendations she had prepared. But as she looked out at the assembled future officers of the Concordat military, something shifted inside her. These were not abstract decision-makers. They were individuals who would one day order others into combat, who would calculate acceptable losses, who would define victory and defeat, just as the humans in those archives had done. "My assignment," she began formally, "was to analyze the ethical dimensions of asymmetric warfare as demonstrated in Earth conflicts, and to provide recommendations for Concordat policy regarding civilian engagement in future operations." She activated the first projection, not the polished policy document she had prepared, but raw footage from the human archives. A hospital overwhelmed with civilian casualties. Medical personnel making triage decisions that amounted to choosing who would live and who would die. "This is the reality of warfare that our tactical simulations fail to capture," Virus said, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. Not the elegant maneuvering of forces on a strategic display, but the consequences of those movements on the ground. She changed the projection to show a different scene. A human child drawing water from a contaminated source because war had destroyed the clean water infrastructure. Our academy training emphasizes victory conditions, territorial control, enemy force degradation, resource acquisition. But the human archives force us to ask, victory at what cost? And victory for whom? Commander Corrin's expression darkened, but he made no move to interrupt. Across the hall, cadets shifted uncomfortably as Virus continued to display scenes from conflicts few of them had chosen to review in detail. The Concordat was formed to prevent the kind of catastrophic conflicts that scarred many of our worlds. Yet, our military training continues to glorify combat prowess while minimizing its consequences. We celebrate tactical brilliance without weighing the strategic costs. We train to win battles without questioning whether those battles should be fought at all. She could feel the tension building in the room. What she was saying bordered on sedition in a military academy. Yet she continued, driven by a conviction that had grown with each archive she had reviewed. As officers of the Concordat, we will be asked to make decisions that determine who lives and who dies. Not just enemy combatants, but civilians caught in conflicts they did not choose. Beings with families, with hopes, with futures, just like ours. Virus paused, then reached a decision that had been forming in her mind for days. With deliberate movements, she unfastened her ceremonial sky armor, the symbol of her clan's warrior heritage and her own anticipated future glory. Piece by piece, she removed it until she stood in her simple undertunic. "I cannot in good conscience take the oath of a Concordat officer," she declared, her voice echoing in the stunned silence. "Not because I lack courage or commitment, but because I now understand that true courage may mean refusing to perpetuate systems of violence when alternatives exist." She placed her ceremonial blade on the podium. "I hereby resign my cadet commission and withdraw from officer candidacy." The assembly erupted in chaos. Commander Corrin shouted for order, while cadets and instructors alike buzzed with shock and confusion. Virus stood impassive, her wings held high, not in pride now, but in resolution. As security personnel moved to escort her from the podium, Instructor Mir-Zel glided forward, their crystalline form pulsing with light patterns too complex for most to read. "Let her finish," the Orin said, their voice cutting through the din with harmonic overtones that commanded attention. Surprisingly, Commander Corrin nodded his assent after a moment's hesitation. "I do not reject service to the Concordat. Virus continued when the room had quieted. I reject only the narrow definition of service that values victory over compassion, dominance over cooperation, and military solutions over diplomatic ones. She gestured to the final projection, an image from the human archives showing former enemies working together to rebuild a devastated city. The humans contributed their war archives, not to showcase their military prowess, but to warn us. They nearly destroyed themselves before learning that true strength lies not in the ability to inflict suffering, but in the courage to end it. Not in winning at any cost, but in finding paths to peace that preserve dignity for all. Virus stepped away from the podium. Her piece said, as she walked down the central aisle toward the exit, she heard movement behind her. Turning, she saw Rhea removing her own insignia of rank. I build weapons, the Hydran said simply. I should understand what they really do. Then another cadet stood, the Luminian, their luminous outline dimming to a solemn glow as they too relinquished their commission. One by one, a dozen cadets followed suit. Not the majority, not even close, but enough to send ripples of discomfort through the Academy leadership watching from the stage. Commander Corrin finally broke the silence, his voice tight with controlled anger. Those who have chosen to resign their commissions will report to administration for processing. The rest of you remain for the completion of the ceremony. As Virus and the others were escorted from the assembly hall, she caught sight of Archivist Stahl. The human woman's expression was unreadable, but she gave Virus the slightest of nods, whether in approval or simply acknowledgement. Virus couldn't tell. The weeks that followed were difficult. Virus's clan sent messages expressing their shock and dismay. Generations of military service tarnished by her public rejection of their values. Her former classmates avoided her in the corridors as she waited for her official separation from the Academy. Only Rhea remained a steadfast companion, the Hydran's practical nature helping Virus weather the storm of uncertainty. What will you do now? Rhea asked, as they sat in the Academy gardens, watching new cadets drilling on the training fields below. I don't know, Virus admitted. I still believe in the Concordate's mission of maintaining peace across our worlds. I just can't be part of its military arm. There are other ways to serve, came Mirzel's voice as the Oran philosopher approached, light refracting through their crystalline form in patterns of contemplation. The Concordate maintains humanitarian corps, diplomatic services, reconstruction teams, Mirzel continued. These arms receive less glory, but are no less vital. Do you think they would accept someone who publicly rejected military service? Virus asked, skepticism evident in the tilt of her wings. I think, Mirzel replied, that your actions have prompted more discussion among Academy leadership than you realize. Commander Corrin himself has requested additional human archives for review by senior instructors. Virus's wings fluttered in surprise. Truly, the Academy's purpose is not to produce unquestioning warriors, but effective leaders, Mirzel said. Sometimes leadership means having the courage to question prevailing wisdom, as you did. 3 days later, Virus received a summons to meet with representatives from the Concordate Humanitarian Corps. To her astonishment, they offered her a position coordinating relief operations in conflict zones, specifically citing her unique perspective on the relationship between military action and civilian impact. Rhea, too, found a new path, redirecting her engineering expertise toward infrastructure restoration rather than weapons development. Several of the other cadets who had resigned received similar offers for alternative service. 6 months after her dramatic resignation, Virus found herself aboard a transport vessel bound for Earth's moon, where a refugee settlement housed civilians displaced by a territorial dispute in a nearby system. As mission coordinator, she would oversee the distribution of resources, medical care, and eventual resettlement assistance. Standing on the observation deck, she watched as the blue-green sphere of Earth came into view. the birthplace of the beings whose recorded experiences had so profoundly changed her path. A world that had nearly destroyed itself through conflict before finding a different way forward. She was no longer a sky warrior destined for glory in battle. Instead, she had found purpose in healing the wounds that warfare inflicted, a different kind of courage, a different kind of strength. As the transport began its approach to the lunar settlement, Virus noticed a small group of human children gathered at the viewing port, pointing excitedly at her wings. One little girl with eyes wide in wonder waved shyly. Virus extended her wings to their full span and waved back, feeling something she had never experienced during her years of combat training: hope.